The power of a second chance. Abraham Lincoln's relentless rise. Long before his face was carved into Mount Rushmore, or his words echoed through the ages, Abraham Lincoln walked a path paved with dust, despair, and dogged determination. Born in a one-room log cabin in Kentucky in 1809, Lincoln entered a world of hardship. His family moved often, scraping by on frontier farms, and formal education was a luxury he rarely knew, totaling less than a year. Yet even as a boy, Lincoln devoured books by candlelight, teaching himself grammar, mathematics, and history with a hunger that would define his life. His early adulthood was a litany of setbacks that would have broken a lesser spirit. At 22, he lost his job as a store clerk in New Salem, Illinois, when the business folded. At 24, he borrowed money to start a general store with a partner, only to watch it fail spectacularly, leaving him burdened with debt that would take years to repay. Around the same time, the woman he loved, Anne Rutledge, fell ill and died. The grief overwhelmed him. Friends later recalled how Lincoln withdrew into silence, wandering the woods in a daze. Speaking of suicide, he suffered what contemporaries called a nervous breakdown, a profound depression that shadowed him for years. Undeterred, or perhaps driven by the very pain that threatened to consume him, Lincoln turned to the law. With no law school to attend, he borrowed legal texts and studied by firelight after long days of manual labor. He walked miles to borrow books, practiced speeches in front of mirrors, and argued cases in county courthouses with growing skill. By 25, he'd been elected to the Illinois state legislature, but not before losing his first run for office at 23. Over the next 2 decades, failure remained a constant companion. He lost bids for the U.S. Congress in 1843 and 1846, though he finally won a seat in 1846, only to lose re-election 2 years later. He campaigned unsuccessfully for the U.S. Senate not once but twice, in 1854 and 1858. The latter campaign produced the legendary Lincoln-Douglas debates, where Lincoln, though defeated, gained national recognition for his moral clarity on slavery and his eloquent defense of equality. At 38, in the depths of personal and professional uncertainty, Lincoln wrote in his private journal, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on earth." Yet even in that abyss, he refused to surrender. He kept reading, kept writing, kept speaking. He rebuilt his law practice, took on high-profile cases, and deepened his commitment to the anti-slavery cause, not out of political ambition alone, but from a conviction that a house divided against itself cannot stand. By 1860, Lincoln was 51, an age considered past one's prime in an era when life expectancy hovered near 40. Yet his reputation for integrity, his plain-spoken wisdom, and his unwavering stance against the expansion of slavery made him a dark horse candidate for the Republican presidential nomination. Against all odds, he won. And with his election, the fragile Union began to fracture. 7 southern states seceded before he even took office. The Civil War erupted months into his presidency, a cataclysm that would claim over 600,000 lives. Lincoln bore the weight of command with a humility and resolve few could fathom. He endured military blunders, cabinet infighting, public scorn, and the agony of sending sons to war while mourning the death of his own 11-year-old son, Willie, in the White House. Through it all, he held fast to his vision, not just victory, but reconciliation, not just preservation of the Union, but its rebirth on the foundation of liberty for all. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war into a crusade for human freedom. In 1865, with Union victory in sight, he delivered his second inaugural address, a sermon in prose calling for malice toward none, with charity for all. He knew the war's end would be only the beginning. He dreamed of Reconstruction, not as punishment, but as healing, a second chance for a nation scarred by sin and sorrow. On the evening of April 14, 1865, Good Friday, Lincoln sat in Ford's Theater, weary but hopeful. Earlier that day, he'd met with his cabinet to discuss plans for reintegrating the South and extending voting rights to Black veterans. He had just begun sketching a future where former enemies could become fellow citizens. That night, John Wilkes Booth's bullet silenced his voice, but not his vision. Lincoln's life teaches us that failure is not a full stop. It's a comma in the sentence of a greater story. His resilience wasn't born of invincibility, but of vulnerability met with courage. He rose not because he never fell, but because he always chose to rise again. As he once said, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.